and put the U.S. more in charge of its own future. Those are the potential positives. But what about the potential negatives in all of this? You could see consumer prices being pushed up on both sides of the border. Remember, you're getting things cheaply right now because of the way business is done now. That would change. It could also drive up production costs for U.S. companies because now they have to get supplies and things from Mexico that are going to cost them more. That may make them cut back some of those jobs that are won back. And in a worst-case scenario, Mexico has its own sanctions in place. Maybe other countries get involved. You have an all-out trade war, and then a lot of people could suffer, Anderson.
A lot of focus, obviously, on the wall today as well. How complicated of a project is that potentially?
Well, it's not getting any easier, I'll tell you that. Look, let's look at the basic facts here. The wall would have to cover somehow 2,000 miles of border here. Up here, you see what we've highlighted? Those are areas largely to the west here where there are already some kind of fences or walls in place. A lot of it is like this. It is these vehicle fences. They're relatively simple, relatively inexpensive. They keep people from driving in. Other areas have these pedestrian fences that look like this. They're more complicated. They're more expensive. So what does Donald Trump want to have? Well, what he's talking about would be a 40-foot version of a wall. We don't know what it would look like, but in relationship to me, it would be roughly this big, and he wants to cover about 1,000 miles of the border with it. That is a tall order because, remember, it's going to have to go through river bottoms and be on sand and on rock, and it's going to have to go uphill and downhill on private land, on public land, through environmentally sensitive lands. It's going to have to go into a lot of places. That's technologically a challenge, it's politically a challenge, and there is an economic challenge there too, which is the price tag. He says Mexico will pay for it. They say they won't. Some in Congress now, and his own party, are now saying they think this project could cost up to $15 billion, or roughly 10 times as much as we spent on 10 shuttle launches. Anderson?
All right, Tom Foreman, thanks for that. Back with the panel. Joining us this hour is Democratic strategist Jonathan Tasini. We haven't heard from you tonight, Jonathan. What do you make of this? Because, I mean, again, this is stuff Donald Trump campaigned on and campaigned successfully on. People knew he wanted to build a wall. People were behind that. Enough people voted for him, and renegotiating NAFTA as well.
Okay, so let me talk about the wall and about NAFTA. They're two good things. They're somewhat separate but connected. The first thing is the wall is actually trying to deal with a problem that does not exist. This is data from the Pew Center. Mexican immigration has actually been declining significantly. It was 5.8 million unauthorized immigrants in the country compared to 6.4 million in 2009. And so this idea of building a wall is really about the politics of division and about, as you point out, a campaign promise that Donald Trump made in order to actually appeal to people who are afraid and fearful of their jobs. And what he did was, successfully in some way, politically, at least in the Midwest, he targeted Mexicans as the enemy. And it was all about politics. As a practical matter, it doesn't actually address a real problem. On NAFTA, and one of the things that Tom didn't mention in his analysis was, if all these jobs are going to come back to the U.S., and that's a big question, one of the things it's not talking about, are those going to be unionized jobs? Are those going to be high-wage jobs? Because what NAFTA and all trade agreements have done is essentially put workers in competition around wages and driven down wages both in this country and in Mexico. So in all this debate about NAFTA and the renegotiation of NAFTA, if that should happen, we're not actually talking about what it's going to mean for workers, for wages.
Matt?
Well, look, I think that, Donald Trump could be the new champion of labor unions and union workers. We saw it with the Keystone Pipeline, which they like, and he just signed that executive order. With TPP, they don't like TPP, neither does Bernie Sanders, neither does Donald Trump. So I think that there could be a realignment and a shift where Donald Trump wins over those kind of working-class white voters. But I would also say this, the one thing about the wall, and I don't love the symbolic notion of building a wall, but here's what I do hope, is that if we actually secure the border, which is something that we should be able to do as a sovereign nation, if we could secure the border, then I would hope that we would have some compassion toward dreamers and toward coming up with a way to compassionately deal with people who are here. I don't think there will be the political will or the ability to do that on the right until we secure the border.
2/3 of the people who live in this country have lived here of the undocumented, have lived here for a decade. They are part of our society. And the notion that the wall is either going to keep people out and or we're going to deport people is just kind of un-American. But on the NAFTA point, I just want to quickly say, the notion that Donald Trump, the man who defrauded several thousand people, ripped off people, didn't pay regular people, is going to be the champion of the little person is just BS.
He won a lot of their votes.
He won it, but that was,
Okay,
that was frankly...
we don't need to relitigate why he won votes. But Kirsten, it is interesting, though. I mean, if the economy in Mexico gets worse,
Right.
if people lose their jobs, one of the comments that Vicente Fox was making last night is that there's better paying jobs in Mexico,
Exactly.
which is actually drawing people to go back to Mexico and keeping people there. More people will try to cross the border
Right,
if that goes
exactly.
away.
So, and this is something that is obviously an obsession of Donald Trump. It's not of having fewer undocumented immigrants in our country. I mean, the thing that is concerning to me is that he's picked this fight with a country that is a friend, that is a neighbor, that's an ally in every possible way, that we are intertwined with economically, is threatening to basically start a trade war with them, which would be detrimental to their economy and our economy, and is somehow standing up to Mexico. Mexico's never done anything to us. And
Well,
then,
to his point, though,
and-
they don't send their best and brightest.
Right, but
as he
that's
said
just
early
not
on,
true. I mean,
and drugs are coming
they don't
across the
send
border.
people, and actually they detain more people than we detain as they're getting to the border. And so he's doing that, and then compare it. He's talking about lifting sanctions on Russia, and is nice to Putin, who is a totalitarian war criminal. Something's wrong here.
No.
Jeff?
No. Look, what we have here is a situation where Mexico has not been a good neighbor. They have not been a good neighbor.
How?
How? Well, ask.
By having
let's
poor
say-
people who want jobs?
Because allegedly all these murderers and rapists were coming
Well,
across the
you
border,
asked,
according to Donald Trump.
the parents of Jamil Shaw, the
that's-
African-American 17-year-old kid who was murdered by an illegal alien.
That's like saying someone was murdered by an Irish
no.
immigrant, and so we
No,
should deport all
no,
Irish
no,
immigrants.
no.
You need to stick to the statistics, and the statistics show that they actually are very law-abiding people.
These are their children. They're
And-
not statistics. They're human beings.
Oh, this
But
is like the
Jeffrey,
voter
it's
fraud
not-
thing. It's a non-existent
You're
issue.
not.
It's completely
There
not
is. There is no.
non-existent.
There is
It's not-
no.
But Jeff, you cannot make policy. I mean, look,
Right.
based on the tragedy
On anecdotes.
of the very real, obvious, horrific tragedy of individuals. You can't make broad brush policies based on anecdotes.
Well, but
Can
they're
you?
not just they're not just anecdotes.
Well,
though.
I know
mean,
they're not just
I mean,
anecdotes, but
see, but
statistically.
Anderson, this is the problem that we had in the election, right? Everybody was saying, well, statistically, this isn't going to happen, right?
No.
And real people out there are saying, yes, it is going to happen.
You
and
can
then-
rile up people and get them upset based on things which are not representative of
Look,
what's
there
happening
are
nationwide.
drug cartels operating on the Mexican border. Some of them have crossed over with gangs into Texas and other places.
They're actually murdering Mexicans.
Yeah, I mean,
they're
that's
actually murdering their own people, not...
This kind of stuff has to stop.
But the
It
Mexican
has to
government
stop.
wants that to stop too. That's a point. So when you say the Mexican
They should have
government
built a
hasn't
wall.
done good
They
things,
should have had control
they
of their
don't-
border.
They don't need that. They're trying to control their border, but the
But
point
they're
is,
not doing
but the
it.
Mexican government has not done anything to the United States. They are our friend. I don't know how you're
They're not-
suggesting that they are intentionally trying
No,
to send
no.
somebody to shoot Kate Steinle. I mean, that's ridiculous.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that their policies have allowed that, and that they are not doing anything
All right.
to help.
We've got to end it there. We have a lot more breaking news ahead tonight, including fallout from the Trump administration telling those long-serving State Department officials to leave their jobs, questions about who will be left to implement President Trump's policies or how quickly it may take to hire new people. Later, the first 100 days of the Kennedy administration, in the words of some of the people who were there.
Where will the lead take us today? Straight to the source,
Would Israel be willing to go along with those demands?
to a side you haven't seen,
That smells a young man's game.
all the way to the heart of a problem.
What is going on in Ferguson, Missouri, in downtown America?
Maybe all the way to the president.
Do you think you were naive back then?
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Weekdays at 4.
Every day we do stories about people in need. With CNN's Impact Your World, you can help. When you go to the Impact Your World section at CNN.com, you'll find more on the stories that move you. Plus, you can find out just what you can do to help with links to reputable charities and organizations. Find out more on New Day and go to CNN.com/impact. Be the change. Take action. Make an impact.
The forced departure today of 4 top career State Department officials has Washington buzzing. Any implication that these 4 people quit is wrong, another senior official said. Quote, people are not quitting and running away in disgust. This is the White House cleaning house. House cleaning or not, the departures leave a big management vacuum in Foggy Bottom, just as a new Secretary of State with no prior government experience prepares to take office. Here to help us understand what's going on, what it says about how the White House intends to run things is Christopher Hill, who served as ambassador to South Korea as well as Iraq, as well as Assistant Secretary of State for Asia Public Affairs. Also joining us is senior political analyst David Gergen. Ambassador Hill, you were a career diplomat who served 3 different presidents. Is this out of the ordinary? Does this go beyond the normal shift between administrations?
Well, first of all, what is not out of the ordinary is that an incoming administration would like to have some new people. And so it is quite customary for people to leave as a new administration comes in. What's a little unusual about this is the abruptness of it and the rather lack of civility to it. I mean, Pat Kennedy has served in the State Department, served with distinction, served in places like Iraq. He's been served for some 45 years, and I think he deserved maybe more than 24 hours to clean out his office. So I think it's the tone, and frankly, if people worry about civility in Washington and the need to change that, I think we're kind of going in the wrong direction.
David, what do you think? I mean, a lot of people might look at this and say, look, what's wrong with the president wanting his own people in various governmental departments and doing it quickly?
Well, I agree with Christopher Hill as usual on what he said, but let me go a little bit beyond that. Anderson, he's got a couple of problems. One is he doesn't have a sub-cabinet. He doesn't have a deputy secretary. He doesn't have undersecretaries. He doesn't have assistant secretaries. All the political appointees that run so deep in administration are simply lacking. I mean, he's sort of home alone, and he's home alone with the Foreign Service. And to fire 4 critical players in the Foreign Service in such an abrupt, I think, impolite way, sends a terrible message to the Foreign Service. So I think Rex Tillerson comes into the State Department as Secretary of State with some real internal issues at the very moment the White House is acting in such a way and bullying Mexico, for example, and the very moment that a lot of countries are looking for, what are you guys up to? And he's got a hard time on the outside working with other countries, trying to assure them the United States is on the right course. So I think if you look at the totality of that, this really weakens Rex Tillerson at the very moment we need a strong Secretary of State.
Ambassador, how long does it take to kind of fill in those sub-positions?
Well, all the assistant secretaries, all the undersecretaries will need congressional hearings, and I'm sure that's going to be backed up. And right now, there's literally no one there. I do believe, though, that the Foreign Service wants to be successful with Rex Tillerson. They want to make him successful. So, frankly, I think the real relationship that Rex Tillerson needs to be very mindful of and needs to cement in a big hurry is to make sure that he has the complete and utter trust of this new president, because otherwise things could go very badly.
Ambassador Hill, you were ambassador to Iraq.
One of the questions.
Go ahead, David.
I was just going to ask, and Chris may have a view on this, I'm really curious about whether Rex Tillerson knew in advance that this was going to happen, or whether he was blindsided by the White House, because that makes a big difference. And we've just had the Secretary of Defense that I'm told was blindsided on a couple of issues, including the torture statements this week, and then earlier about the appointment of an Army Secretary done by the White House without his knowing, without it, and he just sort of learned after the fact. That is a very dangerous way to play a game. You really do need the Secretary of State tightly tied up with the White House, as well as working well with the Foreign Service.
Ambassador Hill, you know Iraq incredibly well. You served as ambassador there. When you hear Donald Trump talk about continuing to talk as president about taking Iraq's oil and about perhaps doing that in the future, I've never heard of the United States talking about stealing the oil of a sovereign nation that we are allied with and fighting on behalf of. Does it make any sense from you strategically, diplomatically, militarily, in any way?
The only things we've ever asked of countries is some land to bury our dead. I think this is quite unusual. But putting aside the sort of general point that it frankly has never been heard of before, I just, as a practical matter, I'm not sure how that would work. So I think, again, it's very important for the former chairman of ExxonMobil to have the relationship with the president and perhaps to help the president understand how that can work.
Because, I mean, David Gergen, the Iraqis, again, who we are allied with and fighting with, fighting on, alongside of to defeat ISIS, they would not particularly like their oil being taken.
I have to believe, Anderson, that he misspoke, and he was talking about taking away oil from ISIS.
No.
As he has several times in the past.
Yeah, but he's talked about taking Iraq's oil.
I know, that's what he said.
Yeah.
No, I know that's what he said, but I just have to believe he got the Iraq mixed up with the ISIS in Iraq. Taking Iraq's oil is preposterous on its face, and with a sovereign nation, I just don't think we're going to go down that path. The truth is, Anderson, there's so much going on now. There's so many stories that we're sort of like scratching our heads on. This has sort of gotten lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. Ambassador Hill, David Gergen, I appreciate both of you being on. Thank you very much. Just ahead, America Uncovered, what auto workers in Michigan are expecting from President Trump.